Next session is Fire's vision and challenging scenarios for 2020. It gives you a picture of the future, kind of outlook, which is meant to trigger our thoughts and to stretch our minds. So I would like to give the floor to Scott Kirkpatrick and to Michael Boniface.
Michael, since we have 2 minutes for this, I'll take the first 60 seconds. And where did Michael disappear? Okay. And at the appropriate moment, he'll wrestle the microphone away from me and move on to further part. Now let's see. Okay. This is the safest device to use. As part of Amplifier, we created something we call the Fire Radar, which is to try to look through the fog and analyze the changes that we see that the existing fire projects, which as you saw from the previous slide are quite a rich set of activities, and try to extrapolate from that where they're heading and where they might, what visions are emerging that might be reached in the 2020 timeframe. And as we've seen, there's a significant degree of overlap and collaboration among the fire projects. There are levels of activity that stack nicely, but none of them separate cleanly because they're all trying to lead to a world of the future and not just enhance a particular technology. And doing so by making things happen. The document we've tried to create is a summary of the places that the infrastructure projects in fire up to now appear to be going, and not just what they've accomplished so far, but what we think is within reach in the next framework, in the Horizon timeframe. In addition to building our own looking out vision, from participation in several of the fire infrastructure projects, we've been consulting with a number of leading stakeholders, and we've invited several representatives from those areas to talk in a panel just about an hour further into the program. So here's our starting point. Fire in the core of the ever increasingly busy charts that Per Blixt was showing you of activities, you see a set of large integrated projects, some of them ending, some of them in midlife, some of them converging. For example, a number of the projects are converging into Fed for Fire, which moves on for several years in the future, while others, Bonfire, I guess my pointing at the screen in front of me doesn't help you. The ones in orange, are those which are close to completion. The one in red, Tethys, has completed. And the interesting thing is a successful infrastructure project begins to think very seriously about how it will continue. And that's really what the strongest effect that we see coming out of our attempt to project into the future is that a healthy infrastructure that allows demonstration, innovation, and the tests of interoperability at the early idea stage, not just at the product stage, which is where the word interoperability usually is used, requires ongoing activities beyond individual project funding. And so one of the things that is emerging, and Michael's going to talk about that, is that as these projects evolve and converge into their hardware innovation and software innovation layers, or even user input and user experience innovation, those three areas are all seeing increasing collection, increasing clarity of vision of what the infrastructure needs to provide. there are going to be ongoing organizations that come out of that will have multiple sources of support. Here what you see is in the overlapping project timeframes, we have constantly added new small projects, international projects, educational projects, and new ways of interfacing with user expectations and affecting user expectations. We've managed to get actually beyond, through late funding, of fairly significant activities, some of which show up in this chart if you can read the small print. We've managed to get beyond the 7-year boundaries of FP7, and there's quite a bit of overlapping work on which to launch some of the first call activities in Horizon 2020. What we've discovered is the demands on the infrastructure at the start of FP7, or actually early in the middle of FP7 when FIRE was launched, was really to facilitate the merging of technologies. Technologies existed, they were launched to solve separate problems, now they had to merge and solve problems of content distribution, interactivity, high performance computing connected across multiple distributed sources of CPU power. If you like, it was a bottom-up vision, and that vision has, over the time of FIRE's existence, has reached up to the user experience through what we in FIRE call experimenters. The experimenters are trying to bring a solution to the market in some time frame beyond the period when it's just research. And so they blurred that boundary. What we learn is that through the open calls that the different FIRE facilities have offered, a lot of new things have been done. While at first the open calls simply extended and validated the integrated projects, proved they were worthwhile, that sense of validation, or extension, for which the most exact example is Ophelia, the software-defined networking OpenFlow-based project. In the first set of open calls, they doubled the number of islands, networking islands with resources, which could talk to each other using the protocols of OpenFlow. In the second set of open calls, they did a whole bunch of new things. I don't have time to go into each of them, but we're going to hear, I think, in subsequent panels, what many of those new things, which we've seen starting through the open call mechanism, are headed. Open calls have required the successful proposers to join the consortia and to go through the legal hurdles of joining an EEC project. Several of the FIRE infrastructure projects have gone beyond open calls to something they call open access, which is simply, here it is, we don't want to embarrass you or us, so we're going to help you use it, but we're not funding you, and we're not asking you to join our consortium or be legally bound by the conditions of our consortium. So we're already exploring different relationships with the users of the FIRE facilities. I think I just finished saying that. We've also, in the 4 to 5 years that FIRE as a concept has now existed, found a number of peer organizations and begun collaboration, interaction, or even just discussion with the PPP, with the ICT world of education and development bridging across research, and with major initiatives such as GENI from other geographies. That's going to influence our future direction. And I think, rather than seeing, as FIRE began, FIRE as an integration of technologies reaching up, that over the Horizon 2020 timeframe, I believe FIRE will become seen as pull, as the result of pull from 4 visible to the end user, if you like, customer-facing directions. There's the Internet of Things, the Internet of Services, the Internet of Information, content, data, and media. And finally, the Internet of people's interactions, where the social network and the activities in the social network become if you like, the visible product of a highly technical and rather powerful and complex facility. And to meet that pull, we need a far more adaptable infrastructure, adapting not only to different technical requirements, but to time-dependent requirements. And so, to make that happen, it has to be part of a larger effort. So, Michael? Thank you. We need scenarios, we need to think through scenarios in which this will happen.
So in the spirit of keeping people informed about how delayed we are, I think I'm sort of 10 minutes behind, aren't we?
Well, I started.
Yeah. Okay, you caught up. Fantastic. So as Scott said, we are actually part of a larger community of researchers looking at the future internet. We see on the panels coming up that we've got representatives from different areas, and understanding the relationship between these different communities is really important for FIRE, both in terms of the technology that's offered, but also the mechanisms for working together, because it's not easy to get projects working together. It's not easy to get programs working together. It requires a lot of thought and understanding of not only of the technology, but also the ways of working. So, first thing I'd like to say is that we're not really here to tell you what the future is. The role of Amplifier is primarily to engage the community in a debate and discussion about what is possible. Right? So we have some ideas, of course, because we're talking lots of people, but I think the success of Amplifier will be judged on the feedback that we get from the people who are participating in events like today. And so when we go to the panels and the discussion, I would like to welcome your views on the possible futures for FIRE, because when we talk to you, when we talk amongst ourselves, what I've heard over the years is things like FIRE needs to be doing more with SMEs, FIRE needs more industry, FIRE needs to support education, FIRE needs to integrate with living labs, FIRE needs to do this, that and everything. But what we have to decide is what FIRE really needs to do to be a successful part of the future internet as we move towards Horizon 2020. So one of the tools that we have developed to help us think about that is this chart here, which has a couple of dimensions. The horizontal dimension indicates how organisations innovate, how they work, whether they work as an individual or whether they work as a community. And so, for example, SMEs and industry tend to work individually. They do cooperate at times, but they tend to be self-interested. Whereas on the right-hand side, academic institutions tend to be more collaborative and more trusting. The vertical axis is about how the work is governed. So, at the top we've got sort of fragmented ad hoc organisations, what you typically see in a market, some regulated and dynamic, and at the bottom you have a coherent set of relationships. This is where you come together and you define a set of rules and you're governed. And what we can do with this tool for thinking is come up with different operational scenarios for FIRE. So I'll go through them. Top left-hand side is what we call testbed as a service competition. This is essentially someone going to market with a service to customers. And the sort of thing that you get from a commercial company, a cloud provider, offering testing in the cloud will be an example of that. Or someone offering compliance testing for a bit of network equipment. Now, this tends to be a commercial operation and is regulated by the market. The second is what we call the industrial cooperative. This is where groups of industry come together. They have some sort of common purpose that is enhanced by cooperation with others. Maybe it can only happen because they are working together. This is the sort of thing that we see in PPPs. To be effective in this sort of space, it requires movements by multiple players in some order to make an impact on the market. The third area, which we call the social innovation ecosystems, we've heard a lot about this over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. It's about how society comes together on top of platforms. I think if we saw in the slides the CAPS program is an example of this. where you have a lot of open innovation, you have communities that are activated, to solve societal problems. Whether this is for ambient-assisted living, for health, or whether this is for trying to save the planet, for an environment. And we've heard quite a lot in FIRE about how we can support open innovation or social innovation, but I don't think we've seen too much of it in the programme so far. Finally, we have what we call resource sharing collaboration, and this is what we see as where FIRE primarily sits today. It's where we have a community of, let's say, largely academic institutions. Most of the testbeds in FIRE do come from academic institutions who see some benefit in sharing their resources because they get greater value out of coming together. Infrastructure such as Planet Lab and Fed for Fire have this sort of working model. Things are largely public funded, and there's minimal commercial revenues, but there is some. Some of the testbeds themselves do offer their services commercially, but it's primarily public funded. There tends also to be a centralised governance in this sort of model, because there is a strong common purpose. You don't have the things that pull the collaboration apart that you tend to see in commercial situations. So when we put a slide up like this, we're not saying FIRE needs to be top left, bottom right, but we're saying, where do we see FIRE? Where do you see FIRE? Where do you want FIRE to go? Because where you want FIRE to go means that we'll have some impact on the sorts of things that we need to do in developing the legal, the technical management technology for our testbeds in the future. So what are the challenges in each of those areas? Just to go through this a little bit more quickly, testbed as service competition, what we're talking about is demand-driven revenues. And this is not just paying customers from the private sector. This could be people receiving public money but pushing revenue to the facilities using some mechanism. The issues there, of course, are quality of service, because if you're paying for service, you expect some level of accountability. You need billing, you need pricing. These are things which we don't see in FIRE today. We have business and market models that need to be established for that to be successful. And there is tendencies for greater levels of confidentiality required by those who participate, because they're paying for a service and they don't expect other people to get in their way. The industrial cooperative, the challenge is there is agreeing a common purpose. I mean, yes, okay, when there's a lot of money on the table, it's very easy to agree the common purpose. But once you've got the money, trying to make that work in practice is quite a challenge. We need to establish revenue systems and value systems, which may be slightly different than what you get in a normal market, because you've got some sort of cooperation agreement in place. And we also see that when you're hitting the boundary of, we had a discussion yesterday at the Future Networks consultation about access to resources from SHIELD. And at what point is industry allowed to access those resources for research, and what point are they not allowed? And that varies quite considerably between different NREDs. Social innovation, ecosystem, well, here, we're talking about people, about citizens. It's about value systems, incentives for getting them activated. We need populations of people. We need places where they undertake activities. We need open platforms that they can use. And the technology, interestingly, when we're talking about citizens, needs to be at a level of maturity that they can actually use. It's no point putting a piece of experimental software in front of a user if it only works just about, because they're not going to use it. And of course, when we're talking users, we're talking personal data, and then we need to deal with privacy and ethical issues in our testing infrastructures. And finally, if we move to the resource sharing collaboration, we see that the challenges there are maintaining the common tools and specifications, because it's really important that the community comes together around these common tools, because that's what they need to do to be efficient, to make sure that they're sharing their resources. We often find also that in resource sharing collaborations that they tend to be pretty inefficient. They're not driven by the demands of their customers so much, and therefore they tend not to be as efficient as their commercial operation, who allocates resources where the money can be made. This is just a fact of life of public funded resources, is they just don't tend to be as efficient. But it doesn't mean to say that when we're operating FIRE testbeds, we shouldn't be thinking about that, because we can do more with the money. last 2 points on that is, securing sufficient resource from the community requires a collaboration model which is acceptable to that community, and we see such things emerging. Well, we know what Planet Lab offers, in the fact that to join that community you have to provide 2 nodes, then you get access to the whole of Planet Lab. There are other models that are being established as a result of Open Lab and as a result of Bonfire, which are slightly different because of the nature of the resources that are necessary for those types of facilities. I think it's very interesting that we look at these different models once the other projects come to an end. The final thing with resource sharing collaborations is that they have a great difficulty in dealing with users that have low levels of trust. So unless you're in the group, then it's very difficult to use the facility. If you're, for example, a commercial player who is not in the group, then coming to a facility which has a sort of resource sharing model is typically quite difficult for you because you don't meet the requirements that they would need. So that's a brief overview of some of the analysis that we've done in Amplifier about the different types of operations that we see in the future internet, not just in Fire but outside, that we can relate to and need to understand when we're thinking about moving forward. So I'm not going to tell you the direction. I don't think that's our role here today. I think it's not absolutely clear. I mean, what happens in Fire will be a function of what projects are won, and what projects are won will be a function of the quality of the proposals and the proposals needing to address the future of the Fire initiative. So this is why my signpost has no sign on it, really. Really, by the end of today, it's important that we begin to put a few labels on that signpost. And I think that's all I'm going to say. I had another slide, but I'm not going to put it up. Thank you.